I just moved house, and there are no women in this town. Other than me. On the day of the property viewing, that wasn't the case. These streets were bustling with men, women, boys, and girls. It felt like any ordinary town. Cul-de-sacs branched off from the main strip. Cozy pockets of red-bricked homes and cobblestone streets. There was a local drinking hole named after some animal or monarch, amusing that it's often one or the other, though I'm not calling the two things synonymous. It had every ingredient of a quintessentially British settlement. 1 month later, however, I returned to a very different place. Moving day, moving Monday as I called it, was overwhelming for exactly 37 reasons, and the emptiness of the town didn't make the list. My ever-growing list of things to remember. What a waste of a day off, I thought. Anyway, I wasn't concerned by the lack of women. In fact, I hardly noticed the lifelessness at first. After all, I arrived a little after lunchtime on a weekday, so I assumed most people were at work. In place of its true name, I'll call the town Propagate. That word was written with blue paint in large, uneven capitals on a low-level wall. Several truant schoolboys sat atop that brick partition, which separated a small, detached house from the main road. A dozen legs swinging back and forth like a row of pistons. They had an odd energy, given they were rule breakers. An energy neither giddy nor intimidating. But the blank-eyed boys did keenly watch my car as it drove by. That sighting was only the first oddity. There was also the young man walking the Cocker Spaniel. The 5 elderly gentlemen at the bus stop. The neighbor standing with both arms around his 2 sons. They watched from the front lawn as I pulled into the driveway of my new home. As I said, I noticed the quietness, but it didn't concern me. The lack of women might have triggered warning sirens in normal brains. Brains with a little common sense. But I was completely oblivious. An awe-stricken, first-time homeowner with a bulky moving van in tow. Don't judge me yet. I'm not, by any means, the bluntest blade in the knife block, just the least even. I was hardly surprised by the autism diagnosis in high school, as I'd always been a little rusty when it came to, as my dad called it, the real world. People and politics. The fuzziness of social science. My mind has always belonged to rigid sciences. Let me put it this way, I have a PhD in chemical engineering, but I once let a tittering teenager and his pack of hooded friends borrow my phone. Oh dear! Of course I'll let you ring your mother to pick you up, I obliviously said. That was how I waved goodbye to my brand new iPhone. I'm smart dumb or dumb smart. Take your pick. Stephen Gawking, the trio of school bullies used to call me. It took their one collective brain cell to come up with it, but it was a good one. I'm surprised they even knew what gawking meant. Anyway, moving to Propagate was supposed to be a turning point. I was determined to prove everybody wrong. My friends in the city. My family back home. I wanted to show them that I wasn't a socially stunted egghead. I had the stuff, whatever the stuff might be. The independence and street smarts of my peers, I suppose. I turned 27 this year, so I knew it was time to make something of myself. And that certainly happened in Propagate. After only half an hour, the 2 movers had unloaded all of my belongings, and they left me alone. I heard one of them mutter about a strange look from a neighbor. Given what would follow, they were right to flee. I spent the next few hours sorting through my belongings, but my mind soon started to wander. I needed something less mind-numbing to do, so I decided to spend the rest of my day exploring Propagate. I took a stroll to the nearest convenience store, hoping to familiarize myself with the layout of my new hometown. And as I left suburbia behind, Propagate's true nature revealed itself to me. I entered a main street littered with dozens upon dozens of townsmen. Far more than there had been on my street. and there came a twisted feeling in my belly. Even an atypical mind like mine knows when it's outnumbered. It was an infestation of suited business types, schoolboy clusters, and dog walkers. There was no longer any avoiding it. The fear, the feeling of eyes dancing across my flesh. And once I realized that heads were swiveling to track my movements, I scurried across the road to enter a store on my right. Things were worse inside. On the street, there had been options. Routes of escape. Even as an autistic woman, I've acquired the social skills necessary to detect when the male gaze tips from icky to sticky. When it glues so industrially to your skin that you sense impending, inescapable danger. When you realize that the watching man or men might want to do more than look. That early evening, mere minutes before the sun merged with the horizon, I felt utterly and entirely alone. I had only an inch of daylight on my side. I didn't feel safe. I wasn't safe. And, as I said, I had hoped things would be better inside the convenience store, but they weren't. I'd only thrust myself into a more claustrophobic arena of prowling eyes. What terrified me so greatly was that the eyes hardly looked like eyes at all. Eyes can't hurt you. But the town's many sets of spheres were alive. Hundreds of spheres connected to one unified horror. And whatever thing followed me, disguised as countless pairs of pupils, it promised a nightmare. Would you rather be alone in the woods with a bear or a man? That question rang in my head, and I thought about a third option. Something neither man nor beast. Whatever that thing might have been, I was already alone with it. A supermarket worker, name tag reading Mike, eyed me from a few yards away. He looked sick. Not sick with lust. Not even sick with a common cold. His eyes were swollen, appearing too large for the sockets in which they lived. And his skin bore stretch marks, as if bulging from the pressure of something. A terrible thing below Mike's flesh, settling alongside his skeleton and organs. Now, I've been stalked and even manhandled before. I wasn't new to the fear of strange men. But this was something else. A scenario above the pay grade of my primitive fear response. Strangers were stopping in their tracks. That was what unsettled me. It was as if they had been skewered by poles protruding from the ground. As if each man had been forced, by something beyond his control, to endlessly pivot. To follow me with a cutting gaze. Nadia, a static female voice called. Relief and fright simultaneously seized my body. Relief at having heard the voice of another woman, but fright at the mystery of its origin. My eyes eventually slid downwards, and I realized that I had, half-consciously, heard my phone ring several seconds earlier. Realized that I'd answered the call with a shaking thumb, though I'd barely been aware of doing so. I was relieved to see that my screen read Chloe. Nadia, my friend repeated. Did you answer by accident? Let me talk a little louder. Nadia, I'm trapped in your pocket. Help! I smiled, thankful tears collecting in my eyes. With Chloe's colorful voice to accompany me, I wasn't alone. Still quivering, I lifted the phone up to my ear. I didn't want my friend to worry about me. Didn't want her to know that I'd stumbled at the first hurdle of independence. Like nearly every other adult in the world, I had to feign normality. Putting on a brave voice took significant masking, but it was a skill that I'd mastered over the years. I'm here, I said, before uttering a full laugh. Sorry. It must have been my giant that answered. Chloe snorted. Where are you, bitch? You stood me up. I thought I'd invited my oldest, dearest friend to visit my new home after work. That was one of the 37 things I was supposed to remember, but I'd entirely forgotten, as is typical of me. The serotonin overload of becoming a homeowner had wiped my brain. Happiness and fear frazzle my thoughts equally. "You forgot, didn't you?" asked Chloe. "No," I lied. "I just nipped to the supermarket to get us food and drinks." "A likely story," she replied in a chipper tone. "It's okay, Nads. I forgive you. Just bring some vino back for your dear friend, okay?" She's shivering on the porch, talking about herself in the third person. I grinned, making my way down the liquor aisle. Chloe's distracting voice enveloped me like a warm blanket. She helped me to temporarily forget about the many watching eyes, and I soothed the remaining ache in my chest with a little sensory stimulation. Let my fingers brush against the bottles of Sauvignon Blanc on the middle shelf. Let my gaze brush against the price labels beneath. "I hear you, girl," my friend said. "You're drooling over the dirt cheap brands. It just seems unnecessary to buy an expensive bottle," I pointed out. "They're all the same, really." Chloe groaned and replied, "They are not all the same. Do I need to come down there and pick for us?" "No," I inwardly pleaded, tuning into my environment once more. As much as I craved her company, I didn't fancy the idea of doubly hungry eyes salivating at the only signs of female life. "I'll buy a good one, I promise. See you in 10 minutes or so." "Okay," Chloe said. "See ya." I wanted to scream for her to stay on the line, but my friend hung up before my lips had even parted. And then I returned to the reality of my situation. After I put my phone in my pocket, I scanned both ends of the shop. In the aisle adjacent to mine, an elderly gentleman was lightly tapping a box of oatmeal with wrinkled fingers, but his eyes were facing me. I noticed his walking cane on the tiles below. He let it clatter to the floor at some point. His free hand hovered aimlessly, and his fingers were curling in a groping motion. Not for the cane that he'd been holding. For me. I drew blood from my bottom lip, tightly biting it to stifle a slight whimper of horror, then I spun my head back to the line of liquor. After taking a mid-range wine, only wanting to get out of that place, I turned to leave. But my uncoordinated fingers knocked a bottle beside it. As it started to topple, I watched in panic, bombarded by a nightmarish vision of strewn glass and red liquid. By a vision of every last townsman converging on my location to inspect the commotion. I was thankful, of course, when the wine did not fall. Thankful until I realized that the tilted bottle was suspended in midair. Realized that a set of bulky fingers were wrapped around it. The hand came from within the sea of bottles. And I knew I shouldn't, but I instinctively squatted to look through the gap between two shelves. Followed the black-sleeved arm to the next aisle. To the stranger who had stretched his arm through the shelving unit to catch the bottle. A man whose face was not revealed, for he rose far above the middle shelf. I saw only his midsection. An unbuttoned blazer and a second hand. An open palm frozen in the shape of a high five or a wave. When the hand did move, it did not offer a friendly gesture. It started to walk, nearly run, across the middle shelf. Started to cross the bridge between our two aisles. And it was not shooting towards a second toppling bottle. It was shooting towards me. I screamed, clutched my chosen wine, then dashed out of the aisle. Dashed towards the self-checkout registers at the right-hand side of the store. I hoped, by doing the scanning myself, that I would avoid any more of the unnerving townsmen. "May I help you?" a watching member of staff asked depressively, not cooperatively. "I'm fine," I said, before wincing at the "Are you over 21" message on the touch screen. The supermarket worker took slow strides over to my register, then swiped a card to give me permission. The smiling man stood far too close to me, exhaling puffs of cheese and onion. A pungent aroma that, horribly, concealed something even worse beneath. A scent I didn't manage to place. "You hardly look 21, my dear," he softly said, "but I'll allow it." "I'm 27, I shakily promised, fumbling in my purse for some form of identification. The man shushed me, lifting a finger towards my lips but stopping just shy of touching them. And as I looked at his face, I saw what I had seen in Mike. A wrong face. The worker inhaled deeply. "You will grow." "Yes, you'll grow." I thwacked my card against the rear, bagged the wine, then strolled speedily out of the store. Even with eyes firmly locked upon my shoes, I felt those predatory gazes. The shoppers, at first, then the outdoor townsfolk when I exited the store. It was only a 10-minute walk home, but it felt longer. Perhaps because, during those minutes, the sun finally dipped over the horizon and plunged the streets into darkness. The street lamps sprang to life, revealing solitary figures watching me from pavements and front yards. My body moved sluggishly forwards, burdened by heavy gazes. But what truly made the itch on my flesh unbearable was the knowledge that I had seen so little. Seen only those caught in the glow of lampposts and headlights. There were, undoubtedly, figures in the town's unlit pockets. Men eyeing me from the shadows. To make it all worse, I returned home to find only my bright orange Mini Cooper in the driveway. There was no sign of Chloe's Ford. No sign of Chloe. "Pick up," I muttered as I tried and failed to ring her. "You said you were here." "She was here," a voice explained. A yelp escaped as I turned to face the lawn beside mine. Turned to face the next-door neighbor I'd seen when I first arrived. He was still standing on the front lawn with his two boys, large arms wrapped around their shoulders. They haven't been there all day, I told myself, though I wasn't convinced. There had been something quirky about the sitcom family earlier in the day. But they seemed far more sinister at night. They stood in their blackened front garden, barely illuminated by the nearby street lamp. They had been waiting for me. I pretended otherwise, but I knew better. "I beg your pardon?" I asked, voice coming apart at the seams. The father smiled and said, "Your friend. She was here. We invited her inside for a cup of tea," one of the boys stated. The child spoke without a hint of emotion, without a single inflection in any of his words. I found myself thinking of the truant boys sitting on the wall. The lack of joy on their faces. The lack of anything remotely human behind the eyes. "I don't see her car," I found myself saying aloud. "She drove to meet you at the store," the man explained. It was an instant response, as if my neighbor had foreseen the question and prepared an answer earlier. "Oh, that reminds me," he continued, stepping onto my driveway and bringing his eerie smile into the light. "She left something for you." The father's hand shot outwards, offering a phone with a cracked screen. I reflexively reached for it before even processing the dread in my gut. I wasn't unnerved by the cracked screen. Not even by the idea of Chloe giving her phone to a stranger. No, it was something about the way in which my neighbor spoke. Something about the way in which he held up the device. And as my hand met his, something pricked my index finger. I recoiled, as if a sharp hair within the creases of his palm had cut me. Mouth gaping, I inspected the bloody droplet forming on my fingertip. It dripped and fell into one of the many cracked wounds on the phone screen. I lifted my fearful face and said, "What happened to?" But the man and his boys had vanished. Fled without so much as the sound of grass crunching beneath their feet. Something pained my mind. Not just the town. Something that poisoned the very colors of the world. Something which prompted my soul to primally scream that I must hide. I ran to the porch, clumsily unlocked the front door, and tried to steady my breathing. "Listen," started a voice from the darkness. I screamed and twisted to see the silhouette of a man in my unlit lobby. I only half registered that the intruder was holding up his hands defensively. "I'm sorry," he said, stepping forwards. "I had to find you first." He may well have said more, but I heard none of it because the world disappeared. Then, an unknown length of time later, a voice from the blackness whispered, "Miss?" I heard the familiar stranger before I managed to open my eyes or move my limbs. Probably for the best, as I would have fought him. He wasn't like the others. I'd known that, somehow, even in the darkness of the lobby. Sensed it in the man's presence. I didn't say any of this, however. I groaned, unable to produce intelligible words. Unable to move my eyelids. He shushed me. "You're safe now." "What is happening?" I finally managed to grunt, opening my eyes a sliver to see that I was sitting in the passenger seat of the stranger's vehicle. "I still don't know, but it began 6 days ago," he replied. Mr. Robertson entered Brent Monroe's restaurant with a horrid smile and blood-stained overalls. Half the town was there. We were celebrating Margaret's retirement. Anyway, we all thought somebody had hurt Mr. Robertson. A disgruntled customer at his repair shop, perhaps. But it wasn't that. "What was it?" I asked, eyeing the middle-aged driver beside me. The man shrugged. Brent walked over first. He held Mr. Robertson's shaking hands, intending to help. But then the owner became just as calm and broad-smiled as the mechanic. It was all a blur after that. The place descended into chaos. "I don't understand," I said. "No," he replied. "I didn't imagine you would." The men changed. All with a simple touch. "Did you change?" I asked fearfully. "Are you going to hurt me?" The stranger shook his head fiercely. "No, love. I'm not going to hurt you. My name's Tom Lawson, and I'm going to get you out of here." "What's your name?" "Nadia," I said. "What happened to the—" I trailed off, but Tom knew what I was going to ask. My eyes had focused enough to see the outline of his face. Unkempt facial hair revealed that he wasn't willingly unshaven, and the dark circles under his eyes told me that he hadn't slept well in days. He eventually said, "I had a wife and 2 boys. Katie, Jack, and Sam. I thought only of them. That was why I didn't stay at the restaurant. Why I didn't help anyone. And when I drove through town, I saw men and boys carrying the limp bodies of wives, mothers, daughters, and sisters. But they weren't dead." Tom noticed me inspecting the dried blood on my index finger, and he nodded. "They didn't want to kill the women, Nadia," the man explained. "They wanted something worse. Something no man should want. But they're not men. I reckon you know that by now." I hung my head. Tom said, "It spreads by skin touching skin. Only the men. I don't know why. It might be a virus. Might be the rapture. All I know is that, whatever they were, I didn't want to become it." "You don't have to explain yourself," I said. "I just want to leave this place. Well, anyway, I came home to find my street in disarray. I don't know how it spread so fucking quickly, Nadia." The man paused for a long time, tears brewing in his eyes. "It took my boys." I had no words, so I sat silently. "They were waiting for me in the front hallway," he continued, "and they told me that they hadn't seen their mother. I wanted to hug them. I did. But they were lying. And they weren't my boys anymore." "What happened to your wife?" I asked. The man started to sob. "I don't know." "Why are you still here, Tom?" I whispered. "Why haven't you left?" "Where would I go?" he replied. "I have nothing. No one. I wanted to redeem myself, Nadia. I wanted to help those left behind. People hit it first. Those not infected. Those not taken. But it caught up to all of them in the end. Haven't seen a woman in days. Not until you, of course. Rotten timing, I said. He shrugged. I found you before they did. I know, I said, nodding. I owe you my life. Tom waved a hand dismissively. Katie might still be out there, I continued. They might all still be out there. I hope so, he replied, before turning to me. That's what keeps me. By the time the car's beams lit the figures, it was too late to brake. They stood 3 abreast on a road near the perimeter of town. A road without street lamps. The barricade of bodies was revealed by the headlights only when 200 feet away. And believe me when I say that, whilst traveling at 50 miles per hour, it takes only a couple of seconds to cover 200 feet. Tom managed only to veer the steering wheel to the left, losing control of the car and colliding with a tree beside the road. The force of the impact didn't leave us unconscious. A small blessing, given that the 3 strangers were already approaching our vehicle before I even managed to undo my belt. After freeing myself, I placed a hand in my empty window frame, cutting my hands on glass shards. I was grateful that the front bumper of Tom's Jeep had taken the brunt of the impact, but we were not both unharmed. The driver grunted painfully as we clambered out of the car, clutching his abdomen, then he offered me a bloody smile. I'll keep them occupied, Nadia. Go! I wanted to stay and argue. It was the proper thing to do. But the man, having sustained either minor or major injuries, had already started strolling towards the approaching figures. Either neurodivergence or my flight response kicked into gear, and I found myself running along the road. Running back into town, because I didn't fancy my chances with the bulky men who were blocking our escape route. There were frightened cries from behind, and then there weren't. Tom Lawson had been unplugged. His scream did not fade. It instantly died. He chose to stop screaming of his own accord. I knew what that meant. I knew what had happened to him. The road back to town was obstructed by several more men walking towards me. I was being sandwiched by my hungry-eyed watchers. No way out of town. No way back to town. The woodland was my only recourse. I turned to my right and sprinted into the blanket of bark, praying that I would find an exit. Find the next town over. I prayed that the townsman's sickness, earthly or not, had not traveled beyond the bounds of Propagate. I fumbled with my phone, turning on the torch, but it was my ears that became aware, not my eyes. I heard not-so-distant moans. Garbled voices around me. Not voices of the haunted men who were pursuing me. No, these were muffled words of a higher pitch. The cries of women. I cast my torch from side to side, not daring to slow or stop. But I found no sign of the captives. And, in my fearful search for the missing persons, I forgot that my uncoordinated limbs do not fare well when I multitask. It was no surprise, then, when I tripped, when I was sent sprawling across the forest floor by one of my feet tripping the other. I rose quickly, feeling a weightiness in my throat as the sound of men's footsteps loudened, but something at my feet had caught my eye. And when I cast my torch downwards, I shrieked. On the ground were bodies. Dozens and dozens of women's bodies. In fact, they weren't on the ground. They were in it. The missing women of Propagate were the dirt beneath my feet. The soil, the undergrowth, or the whatever forms a forest floor. Their bare flesh, which had been stretched and mangled, merged with the soil. Long, fleshy tendrils sprouted from their arms, sides, rears, and all other parts of their bodies, as if they had taken root. as if they had become one with the woodland. Worst of all, the townswomen were still very much alive. They must have wished they weren't. For, as I looked closer, I realized that each woman, tied to another by skin-formed rope, was no longer just one, but many. And by that, I mean I looked down at the woman below my feet to find her own face looking up at me 4 times. 4 separate faces, each tied to a different part of her body, screamed up at me. Not as some united hive mind, but as 4 separate versions of her. Every face moaned in a slightly different way. All moaned with lips closed, but each expressed itself differently. The smaller faces were nothing but circular mounds that had been propagated from her. They would grow, of course. They would propagate too. What? I thought in horror, wondering where those direful thoughts had originated. Her eyes were coated in tears and flecks of mud. She opened her mouth to speak, but spewed only mushed foliage and blood. Her muffled words failed to permeate the greenery spilling from my guts. I knew, though. Knew she was asking me to kill her, much like the hundreds of other stripped women who were inexplicably part of the forest floor. Hundreds of women who might have numbered thousands, having multiplied. Having grown new, smaller abominations. I woke from my horrified trance when the crunching footsteps of the pursuing men were too close to bear. "I'm sorry," I whispered tearfully to the woman, hoping the others would hear. I hoped they'd understand, at the very least. I felt their tearful eyes watching me from below. There was no running around them. Only over them. I realized that the nearby squeals I had heard earlier were the sounds of women being crushed beneath my boots. I hadn't paid attention. The squelching ground beneath my feet hadn't been loose and unstable. It had been moving. Breathing. A macabre pool of rippling mud and flesh that nearly swallowed my feet as I ran across it. Apologizing and sobbing as I went. The townswomen formed an interconnected blanket of skin and dirt. They were forced not only to become one with nature, but to suffer through that hellishness. I don't know how long I spent fleeing. An hour. 2 hours. All night. But I know the sun hadn't risen when I finally made it to a small village miles away. I no longer heard the footsteps of men behind me. I'd outrun them. They moved at a glacial pace, seeming to have been slowed by whatever corrupted them. But part of me fears that they were simply in no rush. That they know, no matter how far I run, it is only a matter of time. They will spread through even village, town, and city on earth. Recruiting men. Propagating women. There is no running. I know that now. I've returned to propagate, and I pray that I stop the nightmare before it spreads. This may be my final message, but I'll kill everyone if I find a way. And they will thank me. OCD isn't what you think it is. It almost killed me. When I was 19, I was diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD. By that time, the disease had already carved its mark into the skin of my hands, and left the scars along my back. It had marred my shins and knees, and overall left me with a terrible secret. Some things, I fear, are not meant to be shared. I wonder how much of this story will fall into that category. It is worth saying to those of you who complain about the arrangement of pens on your desk, saying I am so OCD, take a moment to consider my words. What I have to relate begins when I was around 8 years old. I will leave the sob story out of it for now, and say only that I lived in a neglectful, addicted home, where I, an only child, could do practically anything I wanted. If you're privy to the matter, I had all of the pre-existing conditions to allow this illness to take hold. My home life was unstructured, unpredictable, and marred by a fear of rare, but imminent violence. Strange men, drugs, alcohol, you get it. The disease first appeared to me as a general nervousness creeped into the recesses of bright and early childhood. I was anxious about people in particular. From the time I was able to talk, my mother has recalled hearing me say, "No, Mommy, say," followed by whatever it was I was so anxious to hear. This is not a clear indicator of OCD, but it seems to track with the tendencies that followed me to the present. My mother had no way of knowing what drove me to make these odd requests. She thought, I believe, that I was just trying to get what I wanted. Sometimes she was right. It was the times that I needed her to say no to me, or to say something a second or third time, that she should have caught on. I wasn't interested in getting things from Mommy. I was afraid. This is what differentiates OCD from a general orderliness or a desire to be in control. If Mommy didn't say yes or no at the right time, I was certain that she was going to die. I want you to let that sink in for a bit. Suspend disbelief just for long enough to form the picture. I had a very vivid imagination. To my little 6, 7, 8-year-old mind, if Mommy didn't do what I wanted her to do, her face would swell and turn purple. Her eyes would darken and lose focus, and her breath was that gurgling rattle that even a child calls death. The truth is that I had seen her in a state not unlike this more than once due to her drug usage, and that image appeared in my mind every time the desire occurred. I was sure, and still am, to be frank, that the consequences for one failure could be the death of someone that I loved. This is what motivated me to drag myself down beneath the earth, and in no figurative way, to experience the hell that was our odd, secret underworld. OCD is one unlikely element that contributed to this story. Oddly enough, that is the rational part. The other lies in the fact that our little trailer park existed on the outer fringes of what are likely to be countless miles of unexplored tunnels in the Mammoth Cave system. This is where OCD and unfortunate circumstances meet in my life. Imagine an 8-year-old girl, thin and wiry with dirty blonde hair, crawling through the woods on her hands and knees. She is humming a song, dragging a naked Barbie along with her in her left hand, and pulling back the thick weeds with her other to follow a thin little creek. I wasn't concerned about the dirt, nor the germs, nor the messy arrangement of my hair. My jean shorts and t-shirt would be no more stained coming out of these woods than they were going in. That's when, suddenly, the creek disappears. The melodious trickle of water stops abruptly, leaving my song to the wind as this curious stream drops into a hole in the ground. The hole was at the base of a hill, and it was only about 5 feet deep. 3 of the walls of that hole were dirt, and the 4th was a stone curtain on the side facing me. The creek flowed discreetly into an opening just under the stone curtain. I was a curious child. To me, that cave could have been the entrance to a magical fairy kingdom, or a buried treasure, or any measure of wonderful things. It was also a gaping mouth at the bottom of a stone face. When I crawled to it, I realized it was breathing. Where I sat, legs crossed and Barbie in my lap, I could feel air being sucked into the hole. Something about it unnerved me. It was the same feeling you get when you look into a storm drain, like even entertaining the thought could drag you in. I don't exactly remember what happened next, but only that I left in a hurry. Either my mother called me, or I heard something, but nonetheless I scrambled out of that hole and ran the way back home. This is where the memory kindoff picks back up. I was lying in bed, and it hit me. I had left my Barbie in that hole in the woods. To a normal child, this would be a problem, and perhaps even a big one. They might cry or become anxious. Not me. I knew, as if it were the verdict of a judge, that if I did not go and get my Barbie, my mother was going to die. This is strange even for me. My OCD doesn't usually work this way. Usually it's compelling me towards a task that is right in front of me. Challenge plus consequence equals compulsion. This was more like a sense of unrightness. Something was missing, it needed to be replaced, and now. I knew what I had to do, and I knew why I was going to do it, so that tracks, but something about it calling me out into those woods just doesn't make sense even to me. So, little me in my pajamas made my way to the trailer door, stopping only when I saw the moonlight through the crack of the blinds. My mother's room was just down the hall. I could check on her, and go to bed for a bit. Standing there, my hand idly on the door handle, I pictured myself returning to her room once, twice, 3 times. I knew she would be fine. I also believed she wouldn't be. I knew she would be okay in the morning. I also believed from the bottom of my heart that she would be dead right now unless I went. I hope this is as confusing for you as it has been for me. You're reading this, so that means I went. The path was not hard to find. Once I reached the creek, it was just a matter of following it to the hole. I should mention the pale street light outside of our trailer. It was bright and ugly, but I thought to myself that it would be a good way to get home if I got lost out there. It was the first of a few odd things which just so happened to save my life that night. The woods were much larger, and much noisier now than they ever were during the day. I thought for sure that I had passed the hole, stopping to turn back at least twice. Anyone who grew up in or around wilderness has felt this effect. The woods stretch at night. The hole snuck up on me. I had stopped for a 3rd time, sure I needed to turn back now, when I realized that I was standing at its edge. The thing was much wider, much deeper to me now than it had been just hours before. I lowered myself in, and felt around for Barbie. To my dismay, Barbie wasn't there. I searched once, twice, again. The more I fumbled around, the more vivid the image became. Her face was pale, slightly purple around the eyes and lips. Her eyes were shut this time, filled with shadow. Her mouth was slightly open, and from her lips a gurgling, rattling breath escaped her. It was her lass. That is when I felt the air sucking into the mouth of that stone face again. My stomach twisted at the realization. This thing had sucked Barbie in. I was sure of it. And even more sure was I that I had to go in and get her. The deterministic thought was so forceful that it served to alleviate some of my fear. When I approached the opening, crawling on my belly to see, the fear returned in full. It was black. There was no way that I would see there. Thankfully, I had come prepared. In my back pocket, I had brought my Cinderella flashlight. Cinderella's crown was semi-transparent plastic, and I remember changing its AA battery only once from the time I was 4. Now, she shined just brightly enough for me to see the 4 or 5 foot drop to the cave floor. I was a very skinny child, and the opening to the cave was just large enough for me to slide through. Here is the next odd thing which saved my life. I slid in feet first on my belly. The upper lip of the opening caught my shirt, and caused me to brace with my elbow. The lower lip carved a fairly deep cut under my right elbow, and it pissed blood. I remember landing on the floor of the cave and just squatting there, crying and bleeding until I convinced myself to look around. No Barbie. That was for sure. The cave went on far beyond the reach of Cinderella's light. I was crouched in a little room with 2 openings. To my left, the stream turned and trickled down further into the earth. To my right, the room slanted down like an attic, leaving a sliver of a tunnel in the back right of it. I shined my light around once more, making as sure as I could that I wasn't leaving Barbie behind, and I prepared myself to go home. This is my last coherent memory of that night. I'm sure that may be unsatisfying to you. I spent much of my teenage years hamming this story up for people. A man would come up from the cave, or a demon, or maybe once or twice I explained it as a giant spider. Either way, I spent so much of my life explaining it this way because I thought the truth of it was boring. It was just a horse. I couldn't see it, but that was the sound it made coming up toward me from that tunnel. It was hooves on stone. As a child, I was just too stupid to realize how strange that is. What horse, or goat, or deer would be down there? The second part of the story I lied about was what happened next. I have said that he or she would attack me, that I screamed and I thought I would die. The truth is much stranger. I don't remember. Something came out of that hole, and it scared me so badly that I gave myself the scars on my back and arms getting away from it, and I have no recollection of what it was. Hooves on stone. Here's what I know, that street light I mentioned before saved me first. Rodney, a neighborhood kid, was outside sneaking a hand-rolled cigarette when I left, and in that pale light he saw me. He thought that was strange, but didn't think much else about it. That was, until the next morning, when I didn't come to school. I would get myself up and pass his house on my way to the bus stop, and Rodney would be there every morning with his granddad. Rodney got a bad feeling and told, and noon could find me. My mom eventually got out of bed and called the cops. The dogs found the hole, and the man found Barbie just outside it. I had missed her on my way in. They had to chisel out a good portion of the curtain just to get into that cave, and if not for the blood, they would have had no hope of finding me. I hadn't taken the left turn along the creek. Instead, I had gone right, shoving my body headfirst into the small, slanted tunnel as far as I could go. When they pulled me out, the jagged rock had torn me to shreds. I bled from my knees, elbows, forehead, and God knows where else. I had been in that tunnel for at least 10 hours, wedged as tightly as I could possibly go. It took 3 hours to get me out, and they used rope. If you know that was murder. Needless to say, I was in bad shape. I lost much of this story to ambulances and hospitals and flashing sirens, but there is one little bit that keeps me up at night. It haunts my dreams, and when I feel it, it takes me back to a time and place without any prior context. I'm crushed between two slabs of sharp rock, everything hurts, and I can hear it first. Hooves on stone. It makes some sound that I can't replay in my head. I can only remember how it felt. There's the sound of something animal, something human. It isn't angry, it isn't malicious, it's cooing me. That is the sound. It is cooing me like a dove, or a dog, or a mother to her child. And then there's the thing I dread the most. I hear scraping hooves, dragging flesh, falling rock. It is forcing itself in. And then I feel it. A rough, wet tongue across the bottoms of my feet. Cooing, lapping, cooing, lapping. I wonder how many hours this went on. Finding my mother asleep in the hospital room next to me, breathing deeply, changed me. Not all at once, but I returned there in my head well into my adulthood. That's the place I return to when my OCD gets bad again and I can't leave the house. A voice in my head determined to protect me without any understanding of the world led me to that cave to save her. She didn't need saving, or at least wouldn't accept saving. It was I, in the end, who needed saving. Somehow the one traumatic memory, the choking, the dying, can be overpowered by the other. Hooves on stone. So there you have it, friends. I don't have some silly if anyone finds this message to end the story. I have only a warning. For those of you who share my odd disease, remember this. Your mind is trying to protect you. It doesn't know how. It will supply the effect without the cause, because it was made for a world you don't understand. By the scars on my body, I advise you, do not follow it gently, do not allow it to drag you into that place. FDR's saying about fear itself was wrong. There are worse things than fear. Always respect the local pigeon man. It all started while we were walking to the bus stop. I've never bothered getting a car because of how cheap and mostly reliable public transport was here. A friend of mine worked close to my office, so we often took the same bus home. Lately, I've noticed an increase in pigeons downtown and near where we waited for the bus. Personally, I like the birds. I thought they were a bit goofy, and aside from all the poop they left, I didn't think they were a problem. My friend, Matt, hated them. He often had a new insult for the birds. That day was no different. At least 20 pecked around at the sidewalk in our path. He ratted them to startle them, causing the flock to move further down. I frowned at him for being so cruel. I think any city with a pigeon problem also has a pigeon person. Someone who appeared homeless took care of the birds or treated them as if they were friends. Our local pigeon man was between us and the bus stop. He was dressed in a long black coat regardless of the weather. He fed and petted the birds as he talked with them. He had a beard, but it didn't appear unkempt. I wondered if he had a home and pigeons were just a hobby. He also had a sign made of cardboard asking for donations. He listed how much money it would cost to feed the pigeons he was so fond of. $1.50 for a loaf of bread to $25 for a month's worth of croutons. Matt nodded towards the man ready to mock him, but I gave him a look to shut him up. We started to walk by them while dodging birds at our feet. The man tore off pieces from a freshly baked loaf of bread. There wouldn't be nearly enough for all the birds. I felt bad for them. I made it 3 steps past them as I sighed and turned around. Matt expected this. I have always been a bit of a pushover. He waited as I went over to the man and read over his sign again. "They'll repay the favor," the man said, not looking away from his birds. "They will?" I asked while still trying to decide how much to donate. "These birds are better than people. They're special. They don't accept anything for free, so they'll repay you." I felt 100 eyes on me. It appeared as if all the birds were watching as I pulled 2 bills from my wallet. I had recently snagged some overtime at work so I could afford to pay for a month's worth of croutons for the birds. The man accepted the money and nodded a small thanks. A few birds flapped their wings as Matt tapped his foot, showing a sign he wanted to keep moving. "Don't forget to take care of yourself," I told him and joined my friend. "He's probably just going to buy some drugs," Matt said, even though we weren't out of earshot just yet. "Good for him either way." I shrugged. We could still see the man and the flock of pigeons from our bus stop. True to his word, he went inside the small store he had been standing in front of and came outside with a bag of croutons. At least someone was taking care of the poor birds. But wasn't bread bad for them? It made them happy, so that was something. Our bus arrived and I had forgotten all about the exchange. It was only until a small incident happened a week later that I was reminded of the pigeon man. I had been about to cross the street and had stepped off the curb when a pigeon flew in front of my face, scaring the hell out of me. Thankfully it did, because a car turned when it shouldn't have. If I didn't step back, I would have been hit. I stood stunned over what happened, my heart racing a mile a minute. Looking up, I spotted the bird that saved my life sitting on a power line. I could have sworn it nodded at me. The day after I nearly died, I was walking to the bus stop, but without Matt. The pigeon man was sitting on the ground looking after his birds again. I walked over to him and got down low so we could talk. "I only have this much on me today," I said, offering a $5 bill. "You still have 3 weeks left," he said, and didn't reach out to take the offered cash. I was confused. Glancing over, I saw so many of those birds staring in my direction. Their eyes appeared as if they understood what was going on. A pigeon helped me out the other day. I wanted to repay it. "Here." He finally took the bill, and I stood back up. It would be nice if I could feed the bird that saved my life regardless of whether it meant to or not. But who knew what one it was? And I also hoped this man was taking care of himself and not just the birds. I noticed my bus drive by us. I darted down the street hoping to catch it in time. I scared a few birds as I ran down the street, expecting the bus to drive away at any second. When I reached the stop, I noticed the reason why it hadn't moved. A bunch of pigeons were sitting in the road blocking the bus and other traffic. They flew off after I got on. To be honest, I didn't give the man expecting favors from the pigeons. At first, I didn't even believe they were smart enough to do anything for a person and thought the man had some sort of harmless illness. For a moment, I wasn't sure what I believed. Even if they were helping me out in some way because I bought their services, they were birds. What else could they even do? In the back of my mind, I was counting down the days until my so-called pigeon contract ended. On the final night, I came home very late because of some final project crunch at work. My girlfriend also had been working non-stop to finish a big project. She was an artist who did massive paintings that a local gallery sold. She would spend a few months creating new pieces and living off the pay from the last batch. We were both suddenly hurting for cash because the gallery ordered 3 more large pieces, and that meant she needed to pay for materials she hadn't budgeted for. Once they were finished, it would be worth it. "You're late," she commented, stretching and greeting me by the door. "I heard Matt was going out tonight. Did you go with him?" The apartment smelled of paint even though she had all the windows open. She was covered with all sorts of colors and needed a shower. I bet that's just what she had been about to do before I walked in the door. "No, I was at work. I wanted to finish some stuff so I could have tomorrow off." Faintly, I heard a podcast in her painting room. Since she worked for long hours, she needed something to listen to. But I didn't fully approve of her listening to so many true crime podcasts. She got pretty freaked out after so many hours of them. "You need to shower." "So, do I. Let's save some water," I offered with a smile. I really wanted to hug her but didn't want to get paint on my work clothes. "Can you take a rain check? I'm sore from working today," she suggested. She expected me to be disappointed. I was a little, and I snapped my fingers as if I had just lost a bet. "Darn it. Okay, next time. And how did you hear Matt was going out tonight?" "His girlfriend told me. But if you're not with him, that means he's going out drinking alone," she said while crossing her arms. "Matt liked to drink at a bar about a 10-minute walk from my place. For lack of a better way to put it, Matt had a drinking problem. Unless someone was with him to keep him in line, he always got in trouble while on a night out." I knew what was even going to be said before the words came out of her mouth. "Maybe you should see if he's at the bar and get him home," she suggested. I groaned and rolled my eyes. I was thinking of excuses when she raised paint-stained hands in a threat. I raised my own in defeat. "Fine. I wanted to buy something from the store either way. Let me get changed first. And you need to stop listening to those podcasts," I told her. "I like Matt's girlfriend. He might get wasted and cheat on her, and she doesn't deserve that. Matt is dumb, but not dumb enough to cheat. Even if he tried, he's such a messy drunk no one would take him. You just think he's going to be nabbed by those smiley face killers. Who aren't real, by the way," I said with arms crossed. She narrowed her eyes over just how easily I saw through her and how I refused to believe a conspiracy she did. "If you keep that up, they'll get you next. They also target boyfriends who don't buy their loving girlfriends Cheetos," she said while backing up towards the bathroom. I guess she wanted Cheetos while I was out. I let her get into the shower as I left to get my friend into a cab back home before he caused any trouble. I should never second-guess my girlfriend. She was smarter than me because somehow she knew Matt needed help. I sent a few texts asking if he was at the bar. It wasn't a very popular one, so I could easily find him inside if he was there. I was a block away when I saw someone stumble out of the bar. 2 people followed behind him. My hand tightened over my phone, ready to dial the police if needed. I quickened my pace to try and catch up to the 3 of them. The pair closed the distance between the first man, and I heard my friend yell. They dragged him into a small alleyway as Matt drunkenly shouted for them to let him go. I turned the corner to see one man keeping a hand on Matt's jacket and was in his face over something. "Do you always go around talking to other people's girls? Huh? Do you really think she would give you the time of day?" the larger man accused. I suddenly felt exhausted. Why couldn't Matt just behave? He made things worse by not understanding how much trouble he was in. "I didn't know she was yours 'cause she didn't look at you all night." He shrugged. They got closer, both ready to knock some sense into Matt. I spoke up, causing all 3 of them to look in my direction. "I'm calling the cops if you give me a reason to," I said, not feeling as brave as I sounded. "Is he a friend of yours?" the taller man asked. Sadly, yes. That was not the right answer. They both decided that I needed the same kind of punishment as Matt. Since I most likely was going to call the police either way, they figured they would get something out of being arrested. The taller one landed a hard punch on Matt's face. I pulled out my phone about to call the cops, but the second attacker moved too fast. He hit me so hard it knocked me off my feet. I've never been much of a fighter. I tended to take the easy way out or avoided confrontations altogether. The night should have ended with both of us in the hospital. But it didn't. Wings flapped in the darkness as a sudden flock of birds came down. They flew in the face of my attacker, blinding him. He swatted at the birds as he yelled. Their feet and beaks tore at his exposed skin. By sheer luck, he knocked one out of the air and hard to the ground. I scooped it up before he stomped on the poor bird. I held it carefully in my arms as I watched in horror as more pigeons flocked to the small alleyway. Within seconds, what appeared to be 1,000 of the birds came down. They mauled the two men. The sounds of their wings flapping were nearly deafening. Specks of blood and fabric flew out from the mass of feathers as they tore at the humans in the middle of the swarm. It didn't see Matt for a moment. Suddenly he came bursting out of the mass, his face bleeding from the attack. Pigeons came down on him as they saw him as an enemy. The first man's body dropped to the ground. Through the flapping wings, I saw a mass of flesh and bone. My stomach twisted and fear ran through my body when I realized the birds were eating them alive. And Matt was next. "Wait! Please!" I cried out, expecting the birds to understand me. He curled in a ball on the ground as they pecked away. He begged me to do something, but there were far too many. "He'll buy you croutons," I shouted, feeling a little bit stupid expecting such an offer would work. Somehow, it did. The birds let up long enough for him to get up. He made a run for it and I caught up to him and grabbed his collar. We were going to uphold our deal. He rambled, scared and hurt, begging for us to just go home. I looked up to see hundreds of pigeons sitting on buildings looking down at us. I called a taxi to get us to the nearest open grocery store. No matter where we went, we were being watched. I still held the injured bird from the fight, unsure of what to do with it. It sat calmly in my arms as we went inside the store. We were an odd sight. One was beaten and bruised while the other held a pigeon. We gathered up bags of croutons, hoping it was enough. Matt meekly tried to make me pay for some of them. I told him he had to do it. The birds already liked me. I wasn't certain how we would feed all the pigeons, but that was answered when we left the store. The pigeon man waited for us, and he accepted the bags along with the injured bird. "Can we go home now?" Matt said while looking around. He fidgeted, seeing so many birds watching us from all directions. I swear their eyes were glowing, but it may just be the street lights reflecting off their pupils. "Your friend is in the clear, but the birds don't like you." "Matt, was it? You'll need to keep buying them food every month, so they won't punish you," the man said, almost sounding bored. "Punish me for what?" my friend demanded. "You kicked one of them outside the bar tonight." I looked over at Matt, frowning in disappointment. The fact we got away tonight was a miracle. These birds had been nice enough to give him a second chance after he hurt one of them. "It's just a bird," he protested. "No, it's not. In case you haven't noticed, this city is theirs now. They're just nice enough to let us live in it. Unless you want to end up as the others tonight, you'll feed them." Those words chilled me down to the bone. Flapping came overhead. A few pigeons landed near us, their dark eyes watching our reactions. Finally, Matt smartened up and nodded, agreeing to the deal. The man told him how much he needed to buy each month and let us leave. I made sure Matt got home and we swore not to speak about what happened that night. I think he was worried the police wouldn't believe pigeons killed people who were going to kick his ass. I got home late as my girlfriend rushed over, clearly worried. Only when I saw her I realized I'd forgotten the Cheetos. She didn't care about that. She wanted to know why I had a bruise on the side of my face. I made up a lie about two guys trying to make trouble, and we spent some time running around a few blocks trying to lose them before heading home. She believed that, and I finally was able to relax a little from such a weird night. 2 months had passed since then. I was aware of every pigeon staring down at me as I went to work. Sometimes they watched me through the office windows. A small feeling of fear hit my stomach every time I saw one of them. I should have expected Matt to not be able to last 2 months. He disappeared last week. My girlfriend is spending a lot of time with his girlfriend to comfort her. It kills me that I can't tell them the reason why he was gone. I haven't heard of any reports of the bodies of the two men showing up. After all, two pecked-to-death men on the street would be a big deal. I've walked by where it happened during the day. Aside from some stains on the ground, there were no signs of what happened. I met the pigeon man again, cash in hand. "Can I pay for my girlfriend?" I asked him. He smiled but didn't accept the money right away. They only attack people who wrong them. They'll do favors and look out for the people who buy them food. But I think someday soon they'll fully take over this city. I have a feeling that day will be a bloodbath. The only ones who will make it out alive will be the people like yourself. So, do you have any family that lives in the city? Luckily, I didn't. I paid him and moved on, silently starting to plan when to move. It would be hard starting in a new place. My girlfriend has only sold work to a local gallery. I hope she could do the same thing if we left here. I didn't know how much time we had left, but it feels as if more and more pigeons are appearing on busy streets. Do me a favor, take care of your local pigeon man. He might be more of a help than you first realize. And whatever you do, don't mistreat pigeons no matter how much you dislike them. There's children under the ice. I was trudging through the snow, approaching the edges of the ice. Today would be like any other day, except this one was significant to me. I live in Siberia, and I'm a fisherman of frozen lakes. It can reach temperatures of 51 degrees Fahrenheit for those who are American, but that's never an issue for us natives of this supposed wasteland. I call it that because it's not as desolate as you might think. On this particular day, I would go to a specific lake called the Child's Call. There are old legends about this lake, namely the fact that it was used to scare children away from it. A lot of my neighbors tend to avoid this place, but I was going to break the mold. I was not one to believe in meaningless superstitions, thinking that the lake was nothing more than a fairy tale that parents would warn their children about. All to keep them from falling through the ice. An intelligent means of teaching kids, but I always found it a joke that the adults warned other adults to avoid it during the winter. Ice fishing was banned here. After growing up for 22 years in this hostile environment, I wasn't going to miss out on the plentiful fish hiding beneath the ice. I took my first step out on the slippery surface, almost feeling a hint of guilt. This isn't so bad, I guess, I tried to convince myself. It would be a test to erase years of scare tactics. I kept walking out, with courage and greed, to make a bountiful amount of money from the sheer number of fish that one could get from out here. And when I was about to reach the center, I was reminded of the old folk tale. Children may play in the woods, may play in the town, and may play in the berry bushes. But the man of bright eyes seeks for your soul, young children. Stay far away from the creaking ice. The frigid waters will be your grave, and the bright-eyed man will snack on your soul. My mom would tell me this and give me over a decade's worth of fear for something that was nothing more than a lesson to not play on the ice. No matter, I came to my spot and began drilling my hole. My excitement about the plentiful amount of fish hiding in the safety of their icy shield was in for a rude awakening. I had everything set up and dropped my line. I could feel the nipping of the biting cold on my fingertips. Thankfully, I brought a hand warmer, which I could hide in my sleeves. Even though I had not caught any fish yet, I felt accomplished. The rest of the town was fearful of the lake for generations. Who knows how long it will go on while I bring in excellent scores of fish while they all keep trying to go for the other lakes in the area. It didn't make sense why this one in particular was singled out as dangerous, and I don't care. Underscore 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 underscore. 2 hours had passed, and I was in for some great disappointment. I had yet to catch a single fish, even though you can fish here in the summer and get somewhere around 10 a day. It made no sense that I was getting nothing now. Frustrated, I peeked into the hole I had drilled, trying to see what was the deal. Nothing but deep, grave darkness stared back at me. I wondered why it was such a grim view. The sun was already setting, and I thought it best to pack up and leave. The nighttime can get so much colder, and it becomes more challenging to see the town. It still puzzled me about the nature of why there was no fish. Still, I was compelled to pack up and return to my comfy home a little ways off. That would be about a 40-minute walk. It's best not to get caught out here in the dark when it reaches 70 degrees Celsius or 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Then it would be lights out for me. Before I could begin my trek to land, the last vestiges of sunlight were suddenly obscured by a passing cloud, a thick plume that stripped away the needed light to provide a few more precious minutes of warmth. But there was a sudden change in the environment. It got really dark all of a sudden. And I mean, it was nighttime instantaneously. And then, the pine trees began to glow with harsh blue lighting despite being covered in their blanket of snow. No, instead, their needle-like leaves burst into cyan blue flames. I was not expecting this change of scenery, and I thought I was hallucinating from the cold. But I soon learned that what I saw was more real than I'd like to admit. Generally, the ice is full of air bubbles in this environment, so it's impossible to see through it. But for some inexplicable reason, I looked down towards my feet and saw that the snow-covered top had blown away, and the ice was as clear as liquid water. I don't understand, I believed were the only words I could get out. Down below, I could see the lake floor. Floating up were the bodies of distorted-faced children. They were tied up by their ankles, a rock holding them down. Their hands were free, clawing at the waters, trying to swim back to the surface. How could they still be alive? One boy, the closest to where I was standing, was looking at me. They could all see me as I looked down at them with my petrified expression. I felt my heart aching, and my stomach churned from the disorienting sight. I'd say there were well over 20 kids of various ages. And they were still alive, trapped in the frigid waters and forced to endure the torturous temperatures. But then I peered closer and saw someone else amongst them. A man was dressed in a black, formal suit and tie, but his head and beard were as white as the frost around my eyelashes. But not too much longer, his head whipped up, and we locked eyes. His pupils had a deathly, white glow to them. The rest of his eyes were as dark as night. His skin was cracked all over, with white light escaping through the veinous spread of his brittle flesh. "Come join the children. Come join the children," he kept repeating. I instinctively shook my head, taking a few steps back and ready to run, but I was so stricken with fear that I couldn't move fast. Selfish adults. Never want to join the children. But at least we have each other, he said again, his voice getting deeper. I was able to snap out of whatever trance this thing had me under and ran. Despite the biting cold entering my lungs, I kept running, wanting to put as much distance between me and whatever that was. I didn't care if I exhausted myself and gave myself frostbite. No, death would be preferable to whatever that thing had in store for me. Surprisingly, I made it back home, and upon entering my cabin, I didn't even bother to light the fireplace. I went straight to my room and collapsed in my bed. When I awoke the following day, I slept for 10 hours. It was still early morning, so I tried my best to go about my day. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. That little childhood folktale couldn't have been true. Just as I was dumping a block of ice into the water container, 3 sharp knocks made me flinch hard, and my heart was beating at 1,000 miles per hour. I went to the door but hesitated. I don't know why. I already knew who it was. My brother always came to visit me during the early hours. I opened the door, and there he was. It was such a relief. "Ah, you look like you stayed out in the cold too long," he bellowed, quickly coming inside and shutting the door behind him. I was so happy that he came because I needed reassurance that what I saw was a hallucination. After getting past the usual small talk, I brought it up. "Do you know about the Child's Call? That creepy lake that no one ever wants to fish in?" "Yeah. Well, I mean, doesn't everyone know about it?" "It's only a lake," he remarked. "Is it?" I questioned. "Why?" He asked before getting what I meant. "Did you go fishing there yesterday?" My breathing grew heavier as I remembered what I saw. "Yes, and I'm a little scared." "Baby," he instantly started to tease. I slammed my foot down. "I'm serious. It's not a good place." His face was one of concern now. He could tell that I wasn't being a wimp about the situation. "Okay, tell me what you saw." He sat on my dining room chair. I told him everything. All the things that had frightened me, and how even when I close my eyes, I still see those scared children. Only the safety of sleep was enough to keep me from thinking about such nightmarish visuals. "That's so weird. I'm going to go there and find out for myself tonight." "No, don't do it." "I am." He smirked at me. "I'm going to prove to you that it's not real. It's just a silly story to keep kids from falling through the ice, even though in this temperature, I don't see that happening to begin with during this time of the month." I knew I shouldn't have brought it up. I wish I had remembered this sooner, but my brother has always been like this. He likes to prove that he's the man, braver than me, stronger, and always looking for ways to outdo me. I don't know why. I'm not in a competition with him. It's well established he's the older brother, and I wonder if he's harboring some sort of superiority or, perhaps more accurately, inferiority complex. But I was so desperate to get this off my chest, I didn't even consider as to who it was I was talking to. He got up and began gearing up to leave. We still had the whole day ahead of us, and I had to do my best to convince him not to go. But I also wanted to stay in the house. I would watch from my window as he walked back to his house, which was close to mine, but I knew there was zero chance I would convince him not to go. If anything, he will go to a bar later and brag about how he's about to enjoy proving his manliness to his drinking buddies. Underscore 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 underscore. The whole day had passed, and I was still thinking about what my brother might be up to. I was praying that he would change his mind and not go. But as the sun descended, I felt more and more like I needed to be there. I needed to be there to pull him out when things really hit the fan. But still, my fear of what I saw prevented me from wanting to move. I deluded myself into believing that it was entirely his fault. He should know better. He wants to try to prove himself to be a manlier man than me. And yet, I felt intense guilt creeping up. I worried for him. No, I was petrified for my brother's safety. Without a second thought, I quickly grabbed my gear and suited up. It would still take 40 minutes if I walked, so I would risk my car this time. I got in and drove as fast as I could. That would still be a 15 to 20 minute drive depending on road conditions, but I knew I'd get there eventually. Pulling up to the edge of the lake, I quickly got out of my car and saw that it was already twilight, and I promptly started looking around. I went out onto the ice and saw no one else. There was nothing but emptiness around me, and I felt a sense of relief. Maybe my brother had a change of heart after all. I saw no footprints other than the ones from yesterday that I made. I knew they were mine because they led up to the hole I drilled, which had refroze over. But it all started again. All of the snow on top of the ice vanished again. The trees began to glow when I was confronted with that nightmare a second time. But I heard someone from behind me. Thank you for being a foolish man. I turned around, instinctively thinking it was my brother, but realizing it wasn't his voice. Behind me was the man with white hair. You! I shouted. Me, he gave me a grim smile after saying that. I wasn't too sure what was to happen next, so I opted to remain silent. I really must thank you for what you did. He fell right into my trap. What trap? Look below, he pointed his finger toward the ice. I swallowed, hoping that what he was saying wasn't true. That and I didn't want to look down at the children again. My eyes drifted downwards, and I saw them. The same children were clawing up, their mouths gaping open as they appeared to cry out to me in their frozen agony. Forever trapped in frigid waters and unable to feel the relief of breathing air ever again. But there was something that was genuinely gripping my heart. There was an extra person. My brother. My brother was down there and clawing back up, his eyes meeting mine as a look of sincere regret stared up at me. I'm sorry, I cried, dashing to the ice. The white-haired man replied, Don't worry. With me, he can never die. He will remain there with me for as long as I exist. And that will be for quite a long time. Let him go. Take me instead, I tried to bargain. Deep down, I didn't want to, but the guilt motivated me. He looked at me with a stoic expression and raised his chin. No. This way is more amusing. Amusing? Yes. Due to the folk tale, no more children ever come by the lake during winter. That is until you got confident and I knew you would go back and try to tell your friends about this experience. That's why I let you leave. I was hoping you'd tell more people, but I'll just keep your brother as a fair enough trade for your life. You can live with the guilt. You're so cruel. I clenched my fist, ready to fight him. He tilted his head to the side and continued looking at me with that smug face. I like seeing them cry for warmth that I'll never give. I love seeing them struggle for air, never to give them a breath. I can't help it, I've been like this for millions of years. I've been trapped in this lake for so long that the day you humans settled nearby was the best day of my life. I had something to pass the time. Fed up with his words, I jumped forward, ready to land a fist on his face, but he quickly turned into a mist of white light, sinking into the ice and appearing back on the lake floor. He stood beside my brother and pulled down on the rope a little just to torment me. My brother was still clawing back up to the surface in vain effort. I screamed and hatefully pounded at the ice with my fists, but the man with the white hair had his glowing eyes locked on mine as he smiled at me once again, before turning his back and walking into the darkness of the lake, and all of the children faded into the obscure darkness. With that, the last person I saw was my brother as his eyes bulged, and he struggled more to escape before he too faded away. I kept punching the ice. I couldn't let him leave. I had to save him. I struck and struck until I felt agonizing pain in my breaking fingers. But it all went quiet and I had no more strength. I pitifully pounded the ice, out of breath until I felt the defeat set in. I don't know how much longer I stayed there. Quite some time would pass before the cold convinced me to return to my car. And with that, I had no choice but to return home. Underscore 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 underscore. It's been a rough few weeks, and I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I feel immense amounts of guilt, and I know that my brother is still alive, trapped down there with all those other children. The responsibility for this tragedy has left me broken and unable to deal with it any longer. A part of me is saying that I should go back and ask the entity to let me be there with my brother. But at the same time, I really don't want to suffer for eternity. Hopefully, that's not a fate that awaits me after I die. I'm certain I can relay all this information to Americans and other English speakers because they'll never find the lake. As a warning, I'm telling you this before I get to leave this life and hide in death. If your town or city or wherever you live has an old folk legend, I suggest not investigating or disregarding it. Not everything that sounds like a fairy tale is fiction. My advice to you is, it's better to be safe than sorry. The Undercity. I was helping my mom move house the other day and I found a small leather journal in the attic. I asked her about it and she said it belonged to her grandfather, who was an archaeologist. Apparently he had a few of these from different digs he'd been on, though she had never read that one in particular. She said I could take it home and read it, but warned me that they could be pretty dry. Seems like my great-grandfather wasn't known for his creativity. I took it home that afternoon and forgot about it for a while. I was reminded of it by, strangely enough, a dream. I was sitting in a field on a rock outcropping reading the journal. I remember, in the dream, being overwhelmed by a sense of serenity, like I was floating, like the grass, swaying gently in the breeze wasn't grass at all but a vast ocean. Anyway, the next day I made sure to set some time aside for reading. It started out normal and was mostly just logistical things, supplies, and such. But then about halfway through the entries took a turn. The only way I can describe them is unsettling. I've been trying to convince myself that he just randomly decided to take up creative writing. Gonna write up some of the weirder entries here, hoping that by sharing them it'll take the edge off a bit. Hopefully we can all laugh at how dumb I'm being. August 24th, 1932. The dig has been nothing short of a disaster. We found nothing and the money is running out. I knew it was a gamble and it took more than enough convincing from the committee to secure the grant. The books that led me to this location were entirely suspect, a queer leather-bound tome barely held together by ancient bindings. Strange glyphs covered the front and back in its entirety, scrawled things that had been scarred into the leather itself. The text, if it could be called such, inside was entirely incomprehensible, much of it similar to the scrawl on the cover. Luckily, or perhaps unluckily, there was a map on one of the pages. It took months to decipher possible locations. It was a risk, a massive one. I just had a feeling. An inexplicable feeling. It wasn't a particularly good feeling, mind you, but it demanded an answer. It was my decades of work at the college that enabled this trip, and it will be my head if it fails. It pains me to think that if this dig turns out a failure, my so far immaculate career will be tarnished, an ugly, writhing blemish on an otherwise perfect legacy. Is it conceited of me to think about such things? Perhaps, but when one's field is history you can't help but think about how you will be remembered, what you'll leave behind. Will anyone know my name in 80 years? I'd like to hope so. We have 2 weeks of dig time left and I've little hope. August 27th, 1932. A fight broke out between Moore and Thompson today. The strangest thing. Moore is one of the most sensible men I know. Likes to keep to himself, never causes trouble. But at tonight's meal he just lunged at Thompson. Thankfully they were broken apart before anything could happen. Thompson says he did nothing that knowingly could have drawn the man's ire. Didn't even know he had ire, he said. I spoke with Moore a bit later, after giving him a moment to himself. He didn't say much. Just kept saying that he didn't know what came over him and that he was sorry. It must be the stress of the dig weighing on him. He has another one on the way. I tried to reassure him, but he seemed despondent, so I left him alone. I just hope there will be no further incidents. This dig is teetering on the edge of a cliff as it is. August 29th, 1932. Things have just gone from bad to worse. There has been a plague that is the only way to describe it going through the camp. People have been vomiting all through the night. We've considered perhaps that the rations had gone bad, but only a few men have come down with this mysterious illness. It is terrible to witness. Violent and disturbing. The substance they expel from their stomachs there is no word for it. I have never seen anything like it in my 57 years. Like tar, thick and black and shown an odd mixture of green and purple. It seemed to move on its own accord, but that's dash. Maybe it was a trick of the light. It must have been that, a simple trick of the light. Or I've been out here too long. September 4th, 1932. It's hopeless. September 9th, 1932. We found something. It's just a glimpse of something. We uncovered an opening, and after lowering a lantern down we saw some odd stone. Definitely not natural. From the look of it, it was impossibly smooth, and the light bounced off it like nothing I've ever seen. The news has reinvigorated the men, and I couldn't be more relieved of it. I could see they were starting to slip, and the failure of the dig was starting to get to them. We've been out here for 3 months after all, with no sight of anything remotely interesting, and after the sickness the men needed this morale boost. I've got a good feeling. This will be the find of the century, I know it. September 22nd. We've continued excavation of the structure, as it has become known. September 24th. I have been examining the book that led us to this location, desperate for any sort of clues as to the nature of this ungodly structure, and it remains as endlessly vexing as it was before. I have studied the book, cover to cover, hoping to gain some insight, and each time proves fruitless, the odd runes seeming more and more a jumbled mess each time. I have found something that I seemingly have overlooked in my previous study of the book. A sketch of what I can now discern is our current location, with a strange monolith-like structure reaching impossibly into the sky. Obviously there is nothing of the sort here. There are some phrases in the book, long rambling paragraphs that have the cadence of a sermon. A rambling preaching by a man so lost in his faith it has consumed him. Unfortunately, they make little to no sense at the best of times. The passage, "and we shall indulge in one another and become the Ouroboros of eternity given flesh," seems to be repeated many times throughout. My current theory is that this structure is a place of worship, though to what deity I haven't the foggiest, a cathedral to the forgotten. I don't want to imagine the sort of twisted divinity that would demand such a place. September 34th. The dreams, they haunt my sleep, and I can't escape no matter how much I run. Disregard this entry. Lack of sleep. October 4th. It's colossal. 2 weeks of straight digging, and we haven't fully uncovered the structure. The walls reveal nothing. They are blank. Working near the stone is odd. You can see your reflection perfectly. But only that. Not the lanterns, not other people. It is truly odd. It has my stomach in knots. Looking into that mirror, you stand truly alone. October 9th. More and more questions and no answers. October 15th. I received a letter from my wife today, and the pain of my family's absence has hit me in a way that I didn't expect. The letter details my daughter's 8th birthday, which I have unfortunately missed due to this dig. Just as I regretfully missed her 1st, 4th, and 5th birthdays. The letter details her delight over my present, a small archaeology set that I put together, complete with brush and her own hat similar to the one I sport when I go on digs. My wife noted that she has refused to take off the hat for 5 days now. It pains me dearly that I can't spend these days with my family, but my career is something I hold very dear as well. November 6th. The excavation is almost complete. It has been an enormous undertaking, much more than any of us had anticipated. The area we are uncovering seems to be the front of the structure, having seemingly more decoration, though perhaps that isn't the best word for the odd patterns and curious carvings that line the wall. Queer swirling patterns that wind in on themselves and get lost and tangled. There seems to be no rhyme or reason to them, and my best men cannot make heads or tails of it. No idea of any possible time period or known civilization they could have come from. I can get lost in them for hours. The intricate detail, every inch I follow reveals new details and patterns only for it to abruptly end and for me to realize it had seemingly led me nowhere. While the patterns inspire a sense of wonder and vastness that simply cannot be put into words, the carvings inspire something much darker. Faceless heads have been carved into the rock, again, seemingly at random. Due to the previously stated reflective nature of the rock, looking into this blank visages you would find yourself staring out from the infinite void within, as if you yourself had been carved into the rock. It inspired an odd feeling of fate, or destiny, a silly notion that somehow I had been selected by something higher than my understanding to find this structure. A feeling slithered inside me, while staring into my own, seemingly black, eyes, that everything in my life, every choice and look and breath had been guided by an invisible hand. I am rambling. We estimate the size of the structure to be around 120 meters by 195 meters. November 17th. People are starting to talk about going home for the winter, and while it is disappointing, it is also understandable. The pain of missing my own family is starting to weigh heavy on me. The only two who seem to share my vision are Albertson, which is no surprise as he has always been my stalwart defender and loyal companion, and Moore, who has only become more and more withdrawn since his spat with Thompson. He has been taking his meals in his tent, seeming to prefer solitude. He seems to have lost some weight, though he brings his plate back empty after meals. Something to keep an eye on. November 27th. It is finally done. The structure has been fully excavated. It is glorious, more so than I could have ever imagined. A colossal monument of imposing nature, some 55 meters high. It is almost otherworldly in its design, like nothing I have seen before. From the ancient Romans to modern-day architects, nothing matches the alien nature of what I have witnessed. The stone is immaculate, which is impossible to even believe, but we scoured the outside of the structure and there wasn't a single nick or scratch to be found. No erosion from water damage, which is odd considering this area gets approximately 950 millimeters of rain a year on average. This is especially strange when taking into account the flat roof of the structure. Never in my years have I seen something like it. Our rough guess estimates of the size were close enough. They will be stated in full in the technical reports. As magnificent as the fully revealed structure is, this victory brings with it a new challenge. There is no entrance. The only thing that stands out from what has been newly uncovered is a 2.74-meter circle in the exact center of the front of the structure. The circle is entirely perfect. It is endlessly frustrating to be denied at this pivotal juncture. December 7th. Everyone else has left with the exception of Albertson and Moore. It feels childish of me to say, but the thought of being alone with the structure sent a powerful chill throughout my being, and to know that I've avoided such a scenario is the greatest of reliefs. Albertson and Moore have my endless thanks due to that fact alone. It is frustrating that our progress may slow with our lack of manpower and the increased caution that comes along with that, but myself as well as the others are determined to see this through and at the very least discover the inside of this intimidating structure. The entrance to the structure still manages to confound. The circular marking must be indicative of something, most simply an entryway of some kind, but remains resolutely obscure. Many of the men had suggested digging through the wall, but I wouldn't allow it. It was something that I had considered briefly but had discarded as something too drastic at the current moment. Both Albertson and Moore had agreed with me, though Moore's reasoning of it being a great sacrilege stood stark in my mind and had taken root in an uncomfortable way. I will continue to consult the tome to see if I can glean some insight on this issue. Perhaps some primitive mechanism holds the door closed. I remain hopeful. It simply must open. December 11th. A curious phenomenon seems to be occurring that I have no logical explanation for. While my expertise lies solely in the fields of archaeology and history, the stars have always been a subject of interest for me. The mystery and majesty of the night sky while on a dig, illuminated in splashes of bright color, is truly a unique sight. It gives a sense of scale like nothing else can. It touches the same sense of wonder that a new find does. While archaeology seeks to explore things lost in the past, the stars are the future in trying to grasp the possible discoveries of some unfathomable far-flung future humans is enough to keep one occupied for an eternity. That is all to say that I have a casual familiarity with the night sky, constellations and such, and I am certain there are stars missing, glaring voids where those pinpricks of light should be. I have consulted with Albertson and he agrees with me, though pointed out that some form of light pollution or other natural phenomena could be the cause. December 15th. The structure is open. I wish I could claim some level of responsibility for this newest success, however I have to admit that I played no part in it. I should be more suspicious of this occurrence, but I find it difficult to assign the proper caution at this moment. The adrenaline that has been coursing through me all day is only now starting to wear thin. Ever since I saw it, the hole, it appeared overnight as if by unnatural means. A simple hole about half a meter in diameter. I must have stood there mesmerized by the twisting shadows that played inside for hours before calling from the others. We debated for a long time on whether or not it was safe to enter, more vehemently insisting that he had to go inside, while Albertson preached caution. Eventually something pulled me forwards, and without a thought otherwise I climbed inside the hole, the sound of Albertson's protests fading behind me. It was a tight fit and the walls were much thicker than we ever would have thought, and it took a good amount of shimmying to force my way through. Just when I thought my sense of claustrophobia would overwhelm me, I tumbled out into a large room. The first thing I noticed was the stale quality to the air, and the lack of any noticeable airflow, as if the air from outside was being prevented from entering. The floor was much the same as the walls, the same black stone that seemed to drink the light, leaving complete nothingness. It was an eerie sight that gave the impression of floating over an unimaginable void. I called back to the others that it was safe to enter and to pass me my lantern. After they had made their way inside the structure, I pushed forward. Albertson and Moore inched along behind me, swinging my lantern this way and that, though the odd nature of the stone meant that little was revealed at any one time. The room seemed bigger on the inside, which was surprising considering the colossal scale of the structure, though perhaps this was due to the reflective nature of the stone. The first thing we found was odd. A small pillar, about a meter across. It jutted out from the darkness, a shadow against shadow, made from the same queer stone. The most peculiar thing about it was that it didn't go all the way to the ceiling. In fact, it was hardly half the size of the room. Clearly, it wasn't for any kind of structural purpose, which leads me to conclude that it must be decorative in some sense. Perhaps ceremonial. There were 2 rows of these columns that led to the back center of the chamber. The second and last thing we found instilled in me such a profound sense of dread that I fear will remain with me, even into death. I am infinitely grateful for my cautious pace and Albertson's quick hand, as those factors prevented me from stepping into a large hole in the ground. As I held my lantern out over the hole, only shadows swam up to meet me. I gained an incredible sense of height as I stood on the precipice, as if standing on the edge of a cliff. The fear that struck me at that moment was something that I will remember always. After I had regained some sense of composure, I pulled out a coin from my pocket and tossed it into the hole, hoping to gain some idea of the depth. It never made a sound. December 16th. The 3 of us have spent the day inspecting the inside of the structure, taking in the majesty and grace of its architecture. We have agreed to the terms that one person must remain outside the structure at all times, as we are still unaware of the mechanism that caused the entrance to open. I find myself entranced and unnerved in equal measure during my time inside the structure and don't like to linger there for too long. Albertson seems to share my mindset. Moore seems completely fascinated with the structure and will spend hours at a time in there. When I am in there, inspecting the walls and pillars for any clues as to the peoples who built this place, he would simply stand at the hole gazing into it as if it were a beautiful vista. December 17th. The hole is an utter paradox in that it is mesmerizing and repulsive all at once. I am certain that it leads to that infernal plane that we mortals call hell. It brings to mind the idea of the maw of a great beast, terrifying, endlessly hungry, devouring, consuming all. I am reminded, looking at the whole of something from my childhood. An old, abandoned well that my brother and I had found when out exploring the untamed wilderness of our homestead. I, immediately, was fearful of the well, my small childish mind not able to comprehend that the well wasn't an inescapable chasm of pure darkness. A place that could hold untold horrors, creatures of purest evil. My brother delighted in scaring me with stories of the monster in the well. I only grew out of my fear once I was slightly older and returned to the well with a torch. I lit the torch, tossing it in the well, illuminating the shadowy recesses that haunted my mind. Once I had seen there was nothing there, my fear easily dissipated. Looking at the hole, I'm reminded of the moment I first laid eyes upon that well, and despite the fact that I'm now a man grown, it instills in me the same horrible terror. I told this to Albertson, and while I punctuated my tale with a small chuckle to try and relieve the tension of it, the uneasy look on his face told me I had failed. He suggested we throw one of the spare lanterns down the hole. Whether he thought that we would find nothing or a horrific nightmare in the illumination, I wasn't sure. I dropped my lantern into the hole what seems like days ago. I can still see the pinprick of light, as if a single star in an empty night sky. December 18th. I woke up to a terrible sound, a ghastly wailing that struck my soul like a violent attack. Rushing out of my tent, I came face to face with a stricken Albertson, a mirror of my equal mixture of confusion and discomfort. The sound was continuous, a horrible sound that I couldn't picture coming from something human. It came from the structure. We shared a look of trepidation before rushing over there. There was a moment of deliberation, both of us unwilling to go first, before I pushed myself forward, squeezing my way through the entrance and into the structure. When I emerged on the other side, what I found scarred my mind in a way I couldn't have imagined. The noise was coming from Moore, a deep, unsettling moaning that echoed off the walls to create a cacophony of sound, hundreds of voices joining his to create a terrible dirge, a solemn hymn to that terrible place. The song was deafening, as if all the souls of the damned were screaming out to me, pleading. Moore was kneeling before the hole, the arms held aloft as if in great exultation. His face, lit by the harsh light of his lantern that rested by his knees, was a paradox of light and dark, frozen in a twisted mockery of jubilation. For a moment, as my eyes adjusted to the intense darkness, I could have sworn I saw a sea of robed figures standing in the room. I rushed over to him and shook him desperately, wanting nothing more than for that terrible noise to stop. It felt as if the sound was seeping into me, and when it finally stopped, it didn't retreat right away, it stayed with me. The man looked at me, but it felt as if he was seeing me from the bottom of a deep well, the water distorting his vision. I had the momentary thought, however much shame it brings me now, to throw the man into the hole, anything to stop that damned sound. Finally, my frustration peaked and I struck the man across the face. The spell seemed to be broken and he blinked awake from whatever fugue state he was in. Albertson and I helped Moore back to his tent where he collapsed on his cot. December 19th. Moore awoke in the middle of the night raving, his voice a shrill screeching that infected the night. He kept saying that he had to be inside the cathedral and that it was almost time. He spoke of the face of divinity, of eternity, and said that they shall indulge in one another. He preached about a grand city built by majestic beings, an ode to a holy pantheon of things so unimaginably vast that the human mind would shatter under the weight of their grace. He muttered about a dream that lasted an eternity, a gift from something deep in the annals' existence, a quiver in the miasma of a newly born universe. He cried out about a vast antediluvian realm, where angelic beings made glorious music, a holy ode to life. He called it the Undercity. When I finally managed to calm the man and return him to his tent, he just kept repeating the words, "It's time." December 20th. As I was watching over Moore's tent in the late afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the darkness started to infect the sky, I heard a sound. At first I thought it was just the wind, then convinced myself it was simply my mind playing tricks on me. Eventually I had to admit to myself that what I heard had started out as a low groan had progressed into a bone-chilling wail, filled with a terrible anger. The sound was so excruciating, so all-encompassing, so suffocating, that all I could do was sit in place, staring straight ahead into the dirt and pray to the great Lord above that I would never encounter whatever was making that sound. It sounded as it came to me from across such a vast distance that I couldn't possibly fathom. It felt like it lasted for an eternity. It was as if the sound reached inside of me and dragged some part of me out, into that place, down that hole, lost to the mortal world forever. Eventually the sound died down and I still dare not move. I sat there for what ended up being hours, until the rustling of the Albertsons' tent broke me from my trance. He and I exchanged no words in the wake of what I know we both heard. I retreated to my rent while he took over the watch of Moore's tent. December 21st. What I have witnessed today will forever be scarred into my mind, the hideous consequence of an attack from some unimaginable horror. I awoke to the sound of a terrified scream that invaded my mind like a parasite. Quickly exiting my tent, I came face to face with Albertson. We both wore mirrored expressions of a most solemn dread. In our minds at that moment we knew without a doubt that the sound was coming from Moore and that he was inside the structure. We both rushed to the entrance of the structure, and after a moment's hesitation, a shared look of trepidation between myself and my long-trusted companion, I pushed myself through the small passageway that served as the entrance to the structure. Halfway through, a paralyzing wave claustrophobia passed over me, and the terrifying sense that if I passed through the tunnel I would be irreversibly altered coursed through me. Another horrific howl pieced the fog that had engulfed me, and I pushed myself out into the interior chamber of the structure. The room was lit with the glow of what must have been Moore's lantern, and what I saw cannot truly be described. It seemed to be a mass of flesh, roiling and tumultuous like a stormy sea. It had no eyes, no features that I could discern, and yet as soon as I was aware of it, I knew, somehow, it was aware of me in kind. The presence of it bore down on me as if 100,000 people suddenly turned to me, and I froze under that intense scrutiny. As an ant looked upon a human being, I looked upon it. It seemed to swell in my vision, grow and grow until it was an impossible size, engulfing everything in sight. I felt as if I lay bare under the gaze of some unknowable deity, some forlorn divinity forgotten to humankind. Before I could be consumed by that unknown, I rushed forward towards Moore. The creature had ensured him somehow, and due to how slowly the thing moved, all I can imagine is that Moore approached it willingly. Getting close revealed more hideous details of the thing, and I once again struck with a timeless terror. The creature wasn't made of flesh but rot. A huge mass of rot, of discard, of mottled leaves and shed insect carapace, of things forgotten, left behind. The dregs of reality. The smell was thick and cloying, giving the sense of a place forgotten, abandoned for a millennia, an eternity. The thing pulsed and undulated, some kind of vile ichor, a disgusting oil pit of oblivion. I swear, for just a moment the face of my long-dead grandfather rose up from that mass to greet me like some hazy memory from the back of my mind. It was a face that I had forgotten long ago, only ever knowing him as a young boy, but I am certain it was him. The sound of my name reached me, and I realized that Moore was wailing, crying out for my help, arm outstretched towards me. I reached out and grasped the man's arm with my own, but at that moment I realized something was wrong with Moore. His face, his skin was melting into the creature, merging with it into some sick amalgamation of human and thing. I tried to pull back, a desperate panic overtaking me, but it was like trying to pull down a cliffside, and no amount of force I used seemed to have even the tiniest effect. The moment I tried to pull away Moore's hand, what was left of it tightened around my arm with vice-like strength. Looking into the man's eyes, only a fanatical kind of fever remained and nothing of the man I knew. A searing heat crept up my arm, slowly invading my entire being. The pain was so much that I was barely able to think. All I knew was that soon I would be just like Moore, merged with this creature to be taken back to the ungodly realm within which it dwelled. I knew in that moment that death would be preferable, as by merging with that unholy abomination I would be so far from our Lord that I could never reach his great gates. The next thing I knew I was on the floor, my arms still writhing with pain, but my senses returned to me. Albertson helped me up and dragged me towards the entrance in my half-delirious state. With his help I just managed to escape that oppressive tomb, that damnable cathedral, to some unknowable thing from the dark depths of existence. The pain still coiled around my arm, 1,000 needles stabbing into my skin, and as I looked down I found my arm in the same horrific state that Moore was in. My skin was moving, transformed into that fleshy mass, as if an uncountable amount of slugs raved in orgy to that deity, the one to which I now know the structure was built to honor. Looking to Albertson, the man was wielding a large machete, and while I knew it was the correct course, the only course of action, to take, I didn't relish the idea. I must have passed out at some point, as I woke up some time later with my arm bandaged, severed from just above the elbow. I am writing this now as I fear that if I wait any longer, I will try to dismiss these events as some feverish nightmare. January 18th. The committee has declared the dig an utter failure and revoked any remaining grants. I am relieved that I never had to return to that wretched place. The committee sent someone back to the site to collect the equipment and claimed to find no evidence of the structure. I am reluctant to return to the site myself to confirm this. The men don't remember the structure. Only Albertson and I, and perhaps Moore, if, as I suspect, he still exists in some form, have any recollection of the events pertaining to the structure. Both myself and Albertson are content to go along with this story. What we found inside that pit should remain buried, though I suspect it shall not. It will find a way out. Last Halloween I was stalked by the devil. I was working the closing shift at Footworks, the shoe store crammed into the far corner of the Chapel Hills Mall. Halloween was supposed to be a night of fun, but instead, I was stuck stocking sneakers for minimum wage. I only had a half hour left on my shift, and I could feel the seconds crawling by. The clock on my phone felt frozen at 7:30 p.m. I drummed my fingers on the counter, trying to stay awake. My manager, who was supposed to help close, had ducked up for an early smoke break and never came back. Most of the customers had already thinned out, but there were still a few stragglers wandering around the mall. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my friend Ben. "Ben, yo, you coming tonight or what?" I sighed. I'd been dodging the question all day. Ben's Halloween party was supposed to be the big event of the night. Half of the school was going, including all of my friends. But I hadn't planned on going. After my shift was over, all I really wanted to do was just crash in my bed. I started typing, probably not, when another text popped up. "Ben, don't be lame, man, it's Halloween." I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the keyboard. It had been a while since I'd done anything fun, and even though I didn't have a costume, I could probably grab something cheap from the Halloween store on the way. I wasn't exactly Mr. Social, but maybe it wouldn't hurt to get out of the house for once. "Yo," a voice called from the store entrance, breaking my introspection. I looked up and saw Ben and Derek walking into the store like they owned the place. Ben flashed a grin, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "Come on, bro. You're not getting out of this one." "You're coming tonight," Ben said, leaning against the counter. Derek nodded, smirking. "Yeah, man, you never come to anything. You didn't show up last year either." "Look," I started, "I'm just tired, and I don't even have a costume, and I don't even have time to dash." "You've got time," Ben interrupted. "The party doesn't start until 10. Grab something cheap and just show up. It's not like you have anything better to do." I sighed. They weren't wrong. As much as I wanted to protest, I started to give in to the pressure. Ben raised an eyebrow, a smirk growing on his face, anticipating my answer. "Fine," I muttered. "I'll come. But I probably won't stay long." "Yes." "There he is," Ben grinned, patting me on the shoulder. "You're gonna have a good time, bud, trust me." Derek glanced at his watch. "All right, well, we're heading out. See you there." I watched them leave, their laughter fading as they disappeared out of the mall. I wasn't sure I believed Ben about having a good time, but I was locked in now. I just had to make it through the last stretch of my shift, grab a costume, and then down a few drinks to make the night more tolerable. The mall was basically empty now. Most of the other stores were now closed, and the place began to get a little darker as more and more lights were turned off. I started mentally checking off the closing tasks, sweep the floor, cash out the register. Routine stuff. As I was counting the minutes to clock out, something caught my eye near the entrance. A person stood there, just outside the store, facing me. They were in a Halloween costume. A creepy red latex devil mask, which had a large pointy nose and a cartoonish wide smile which reached ear to ear. Small black horns protruded from the top of the mask. It looked pretty realistic, like one of those expensive movie-quality masks. Had it not been so startling, it would have actually been pretty impressive. The mask was paired with a mismatched black and red suit that looks like it was put together from pieces found at a thrift store. At first, I assumed it was just a last-minute shopper, or someone probably killing time before heading to a party. But they stood completely still, facing me, not moving. Not browsing. Not shopping. Just standing there. I felt my chest tighten. There was no reason to be freaked out by some weirdo in a Halloween costume, but something about them made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The way they were just standing still, watching me, began to eat away at my nerves. I was about to tell him, "We're closed," when he turned, slowly, deliberately, and walked away. I just stared, frozen in place. His steps were slow, measured, almost robotic as he disappeared out of sight. I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath the entire time. What the hell was that about? I thought. Just some creep messing around, probably. It was Halloween, after all. I shook it off, trying to refocus on closing the store and getting out of there. But every few seconds, I found myself glancing toward the entrance, half expecting to see that creepy guy in a devil mask there again, watching me. By the time I finally clocked out, I was beat, and my nerves were shot. I made my way out of the now empty mall toward my car, checking behind my shoulder every few seconds. I safely made it to my car, now fully convinced that the person, whoever it was simply messing around with me. I brushed off the feeling and headed to the Halloween store to pick up a costume for the party. The Halloween store was one of those pop-up stores that showed up every year, taking over abandoned sporting goods stores and the like. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, a chime sounding ringing loudly in the nearly empty store. The place was a mess. Shelves were mostly empty now, and decorations were scattered all the floor, with a few straggling shoppers picking over the scraps. The sound of Halloween music played faintly through the speakers. I wandered aimlessly, searching for any scraps of a costume. The aisles were nearly bare, but I kept looking, feeling the pressure of time build. Suddenly, the music cut off, leaving the store in an uncomfortable silence. I knew I didn't have much time before they closed, so I hurried, eyes darting over the shelves. The door chimed again. Someone else had come in, but I didn't bother to look, I was too focused. At the end of one aisle, I found a small rack with cheap knockoff masks of famous movie killers. I grabbed a plastic Jason-style mask headed for the register, rushing to get out. As I turned the corner, my heart lurched. There he was. The man in the devil mask. He stood at the far end of the aisle, illuminated by the dim, flickering light. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched me. My stomach twisted, and my throat went dry. No fucking way, I thought, feeling my pulse hammer in my ears. He stood perfectly still, just staring. For a split second, I considered throwing the mask down and bolting. But something kept me rooted. Maybe it was disbelief, maybe shock. I told myself it was a coincidence, forcing my legs to carry me to the front. The cashier barely looked up from his phone as I approached, too busy scrolling through his phone. My skin crawled as I sensed the man in the devil mask moving closer, his eyes locked on me. I could feel it, the weight of his stare boring into me. Just this, I muttered, tossing the cheap mask onto the counter. It felt so pointless, but at least I wouldn't show up to Ben's party without something. The cashier rang it up slowly, the beeps of the register cutting through the heavy silence. I kept my head down, resisting the urge to look back, but I knew he was still watching me. "That'll be $10.53, the cashier said, snapping his gum, finally glancing up at me. I handed him the crumpled bills, my hand shaking slightly as I grabbed the change and shoved the mask into a bag. Without another word, I made a quick escape toward the exit. The bell chimed again as I pushed through the door, and the cold night air hit me like a splash of water. I exhaled sharply, tension easing from my shoulders. Instinctively, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see him, the man in the devil mask, standing at the entrance, following me still. But there was nothing. Just the empty store and a couple of people loitering on the sidewalk. He was gone. Again. I shook my head and got in my car. I kept reminding myself, it's Halloween. Creepiness was just part of it. And besides, I had bigger things to worry about, like not making an idiot of myself at Ben's party. By the time I got to Ben's place, the party was already in full swing. Cars were parked up and down the block, and I could hear the bass from the music thumping before I even stepped out of my car. The house was decorated to the nines, fake cobwebs hanging from the trees, jack-o'-lanterns lining the walkway, and orange lights flickering in the windows. I could hear Rob Zombie's Dragula blasting from inside the house. I pulled the plastic hockey mask out of the bag and slipped it over my face. It wasn't much, but it would do. I didn't feel like going all out for this party anyway. I just wanted to blend in, have a few drinks, and hopefully avoid any awkward moments with people. The front door was wide open, and people were spilling out into the yard, already tipsy and laughing too loud. I stepped inside, and the smell of beer and sweat hitting me immediately. Ben's living room was packed, people in costumes, some elaborate and some as half-assed as mine, dancing, drinking, and yelling over the blaring music. "Hey! You actually came!" Ben appeared out of nowhere, clapping me on the back hard enough to nearly knock me over. He was wearing a vampire costume, complete with fake blood dripping from his mouth. Yeah, well, you didn't really give me a choice, I said jokingly, raising my voice to be heard over the music. Here, grab a drink, Ben shouted, shoving a plastic cup of beer into my hand before I could protest. We're playing beer pong in the kitchen, come on. I hesitated. Beer pong wasn't really my thing, but it was better than standing around awkwardly in the corner. Sure, yeah, why not? I followed him into the kitchen, where a crowd had gathered around a table lined with orange plastic cups. Someone had set up a fog machine, and the room was filled with swirling white mist, making it hard to see more than a few feet in front of me. I took a swig of beer and tried to relax. It was just a party, after all. We played several rounds. The beer had begun to do its job with loosening me up, and I was actually starting to have fun. For a moment, I even began to question myself on why I didn't come out more. But just as that thought occurred, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him again. The figure. That devil mask. That long pointy nose and wide smile. He was standing in the living room, just beyond the edge of the crowd, perfectly still like he had been at the store. He didn't move or try to talk to anyone. He just stood there, watching me. My throat went dry, and my stomach twisted into knots. What the hell was he doing here? How did he follow me here? I blinked, half expecting him to disappear, like a trick of the light. But when I looked again, he was still there. He raised his hand and gave me a slow, taunting wave, and turned to leave. Maybe it was the drinks, or maybe it was the feeling of security from the crowd, but anger began to boil up inside me. I set my drink down and pushed through the crowd, trying to keep him in sight. I wanted to grab him and find out who he was and why the hell he was following me. But by the time I reached the living room, he was gone. Just like that, I scanned the room, my heart pounding in my chest. People were laughing, talking, and dancing like nothing was wrong. I thought about telling Ben, but what could I say? That some weirdo in a devil mask had been following me around all night? He'd just think I was being paranoid. I needed to calm down. I told myself it was just some guy playing a prank, maybe someone who had been at the mall earlier and recognized me. Or maybe it was someone I knew just messing with me. It was Halloween. People were supposed to be creepy. I grabbed another beer, took a long drink, and forced myself to relax. It was just in my head. It's nothing to worry about. I didn't stay at the party long after that. After a couple more beers and some awkward small talk, I made my excuses and slipped out. I just wasn't in the mood anymore. All I could think about was that guy. Every time I turned around, I expected to see him in his devil mask, standing there, just watching. It was a relief to get back to my car and leave the noise and chaos behind. The streets were quiet as I drove home, the occasional group of teenagers in costumes still wandering the sidewalks. My parents' house was only a few blocks away, and when I pulled into the driveway, everything seemed peaceful. The porch light was on, and the pumpkins were lit on the front porch. I parked and walked up the front steps, fumbling with my keys as I unlocked the door. The quiet was almost comforting after the noise of the party. I stepped inside, closing the doors softly behind me. "Mom? Dad?" I called out, but there was no answer. They had probably gone to bed already. I flipped on the hallway light and headed for the stairs, planning to just crash in my room and forget about the whole night. But something stopped me. A sound. A drip. A slow, steady drip. Not the drip of a sink, a heavier, thicker drip. Slowly, I made my way toward the sound in the direction of the kitchen. My breath caught in my throat as my eyes skinned around the house. As I got closer to the kitchen, the sound got louder, and there was something else, a smell, an odd smell, almost like copper, thick in the air. I rounded the corner into the kitchen when I saw the outline of something. No, not something. Someone. I froze, my blood turning to ice. It was my dad. He was sitting at the kitchen table, and so was my mom. Only, something was wrong. They were sitting at the table, side by side, like they had been waiting for me. But there was something horribly wrong, so wrong that it took my brain a moment to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. Their heads were gone. The jagged, red stumps of their necks were all that remained, blood streaking down their clothes, pooling onto the floor. The table, once warm and familiar, was now soaked in it. My stomach lurched, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. I stood frozen, in shock, every muscle locked in place as my brain struggled to process the nightmare in front of me. At first, I wasn't able to comprehend if what I was seeing was real or some twisted hallucination. And then, I saw him. The man, the devil, was standing in the corner, almost blending into the shadows. He was big, much bigger up close, and his posture was unerringly calm. In each hand, he held a head, their heads, by the hair, the thick strands twisted around his fingers. In his hands, I saw the source of the sound. Blood dripped from their severed heads, landing on the tile floor with a soft, rhythmic plip, plip, plip. The sound was horrible, and for a moment, all I could hear was the sound of the dripping and my own heartbeat. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just stood there, perfectly still. His arms were reached up toward me, holding my parents' heads proudly, like two trophies. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in fear. I slowly backed away, step by step, my eyes never leaving him. His head didn't turn, his body didn't shift, he just stared, with that pointy nose, that huge, red smile, as if he were frozen in time. I kept moving backward, my chest tightening with every inch I gained. The last thing I saw before I turned and ran was the man still standing there in the corner, heads dangling from his hands, utterly motionless, his cold eyes boring into me. He never moved, and somehow, that was worse. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I was halfway down the street, gasping for breath, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone. My fingers barely worked as I dialed 911, my voice trembling as I told the operator what had happened. When the police arrived, the house was empty. The man, the devil, was gone. They never found him. The police chalked it up to some kind of gruesome home invasion. But I knew the truth. He had been following me the whole night, maybe longer, watching, waiting for the perfect moment. He had wanted me to see. To know. He chose me for some reason. That was last Halloween, when my life was forever changed. I'm terrified he is going to come back for me this Halloween. I'm terrified that at any moment, I'm going to see that mask again.